Hello, friends. Over 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, a blind poet named Homer, along with the greatest writers, dramatists, and historians of his time, recorded the stories we now know as Greek mythology. They spoke of mighty heroes, powerful gods of Olympus, and the mortal men and women unlucky enough to cross their paths. But who was Zeus? Why did he wage war on his own father and send a great flood to wipe out humankind? How did Prometheus create humans? And why were the horrors of the world released from Pandora's box? What awaited souls in the realm of Hades? And how were monsters like the Hydra, the Cyclops, and Medusa defeated by legendary heroes? From the 12 Labors of Hercules to the Trojan War, this is the full story of Greek mythology. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm creating here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now let's dive into today's journey. In the beginning, there was only chaos, a great void. But from chaos emerged Gaia, the earth, and Eros, love. Night and day followed, ending the rule of Erebus, darkness, and bringing the eternal cycle of dusk and dawn. At last came Tartarus, the deepest abyss of the world, where souls were sent for punishment. But these weren't the only ancient beings. Gaia gave birth to another, Uranus, the sky. Together, they bore 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters, the Titans. Among them was Oceanus, the great river encircling the world. His brother Hyperion, the sun, drove his chariot across the sky, lighting the earth. And when night came, his daughter Selene, the moon, rose to chase away the dark. But Uranus was a cruel father, imprisoning the Titans deep within the earth. To free themselves, they turned to their mother Gaia. She forged an unbreakable sickle and gave it to her youngest and strongest son, Cronus. Cronus waited patiently, and when Uranus came to Gaia once more, Cronus leapt out and cut off his father's genitals. They fell into the sea, and from them arose Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, the first of a new generation. With Uranus defeated, Cronus became ruler of the world. But his reign would not last. He had 3 sons and 3 daughters with his sister Rhea. These children became gods. Yet Cronus was no less cruel than his father. When he learned of a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, he swallowed each newborn at birth. Only one survived, Zeus the youngest, saved by Rhea. To protect him, she hid the infant on Mount Ida in Crete and gave Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling cloth. Cronus swallowed the stone without suspecting a thing. Zeus was raised by his grandmother, Gaia, until he grew strong enough to challenge his father. When the time came, he returned, overthrew Cronus, and freed his brothers and sisters from his belly. Together, they waged war on the Titans for 10 years. Zeus released from the depths of the earth the 100-handed giants and the Cyclops, legendary smiths who forged for him the mighty thunderbolt, for Poseidon, the trident, and for Hades, the helmet of invisibility that turned the tide of war. With the Titans defeated, Zeus imprisoned them in Tartarus to suffer forever. Atlas, who led the Titans in battle, received a special punishment. He was forced to hold up the sky on his shoulders for eternity. Only a few Titans escaped punishment. Themis, the Titaness of justice, and her son Prometheus, who had supported Zeus, were spared and allowed to live among the gods. With the world freed from the Titans' rule, the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, divided the realms. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld, home of the dead. Settling on Mount Olympus, Zeus and the other gods became known as the 12 Olympians, ruling over both mortals and monsters. But even though the gods ruled the earth, Prometheus, one of the spared titans, was displeased with its inhabitants. He saw only beasts, mindless creatures unworthy of notice, so he shaped humans from clay, giving them the image of the gods. Yet something was still missing. People lived in caves, like animals. Then Prometheus gave them fire, the primal flame, lifting them from darkness, teaching them to make tools, and helping them rise above other creatures. Zeus was displeased. He demanded that humans give thanks to the gods and ordered them to offer animal sacrifices, allowing Prometheus to decide which parts belonged to the gods. But Prometheus sided with humanity. He slaughtered a bull and split the carcass in two, hiding the best meat under the stomach and the bones under a layer of appetizing fat. Zeus chose the portion with the fat, but finding only bones beneath, grew angry and took fire away from humans. They returned to darkness, yet Prometheus would not abandon them. He climbed Olympus, stole back the fire, and returned it to humanity, giving them a chance at civilization. Zeus grew even angrier. He chained Prometheus to a mountain, where each day an eagle tore at his liver, which grew back each night. This torment went on forever. But Zeus wasn't finished. He wanted to punish humanity too. So he ordered Hephaestus to create a being capable of bringing suffering. Hephaestus shaped from clay the first woman. Aphrodite gave her beauty and emotion. Zeus gave her curiosity, and Hermes gave her speech and a name. Thus, Pandora was born, gifted with every gift. She was given a sealed jar and forbidden to open it. Hermes then led Pandora to Earth, where she became the wife of the Titan Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. Despite his brother's warnings, Epimetheus accepted her, enchanted by her beauty. They lived happily and had a daughter, Pyrrha, but Pandora could not forget the jar. Over time, her curiosity turned to longing, and one day she opened it, outpoured all the world's evils, envy, greed, old age, disease, everything Prometheus had tried to shield humanity from. Pandora managed to close the jar when only hope remained inside. This was Zeus's greatest punishment. Hope compelled humans to cling to life despite all its hardships. Thus ended the Golden Age, a time when humans lived carefree and ageless, feeding on nature's bounty and enjoying life. But with old age released from the jar, their time was over. The Silver Age followed, then the Bronze. People became proud, ceased honoring the gods, and turned to war. Cruel and bloodthirsty, they angered Zeus, who decided humanity must be destroyed. He ordered Poseidon to gather all his power and strike the deepest waters of the ocean with his trident. A wave higher than mountains rose and swallowed every city. Rain poured from the heavens, winds drove the waters until all land disappeared. Those who survived soon died of hunger. At last, no dry land remained on earth. Only two survived: Pyrrha, daughter of Pandora, and Deucalion, son of Prometheus. Forewarned by Prometheus of the coming flood, they built a boat to escape certain death. Their small vessel endured Poseidon's raging storm, drifting alone across endless oceans as they mourned their lost kin. In time, they reached Mount Parnassus, whose peak remained the only place untouched by the waters. Believing his work complete, Zeus commanded the rains to stop and the waters to retreat. The earth grew calm once more, but though the land was calm, no human soul remained upon it. Deucalion and Pyrrha prayed to the gods, asking how to restore humankind. Then the Titaness Themis answered their prayer. She told them, "Go forth and throw stones behind you." Day after day, night after night, they cast stones behind them. The ones Deucalion threw became men. The ones Pyrrha threw became women. Thus, humankind was born again. The sins of their ancestors were washed away. They were given a second chance, a chance to choose their own path. Only time would tell if they would be as cruel and destructive as those who came before. Zeus, king of the gods, ruled from his throne atop Mount Olympus. His symbols, the thunderbolt and the eagle, became signs for all mankind. He controlled the weather, from storms to snowfalls, according to his mood. The Greeks saw him as the greatest of all gods. Those who honored him received his favor. Those who defied him felt his wrath. Having taken the world under his power, Zeus sought a wife to rule beside him. But the king of the gods was infamous for his unfaithfulness. Over his reign, he had at least 7 wives. His first wife was the nymph Metis, goddess of wisdom. She soon became pregnant, but Zeus was warned by his great-grandparents, Gaia and Uranus, that Metis would bear a son, destined to overthrow him. To avoid the prophecy, Zeus swallowed Metis before the child could be born. Later, he began to feel a terrible headache, so unbearable that he begged someone to split open his skull. From the crack in his forehead emerged Metis's daughter, Athena, goddess of war and wisdom, already grown and ready to take her place among the Olympians. Zeus's second wife was his aunt Themis, titaness of justice and law. She had betrayed her fellow titans to support the gods in their war. Together they had 3 children, whose influence on the world was immense. The 3 Moirai, the Fates who spun the thread of every soul's life. The youngest, Clotho the spinner, wove the thread of human life at birth. Her elder sister Lachesis, the allotter, measured its length and course. And the eldest and most feared, Atropos, the unturning, cut the thread when life came to an end. Zeus had many other wives and fathered countless gods and goddesses. But his 7th and final wife was his elder sister Hera, goddess of women and marriage. At last he found a queen to reign beside him. Yet even after marrying Hera, Zeus could not restrain his desire, pursuing many women. As a result, he became related to nearly every god and hero, often taking on different forms to win a woman's favor. One of them was Europa, a princess of Tyre and sister of the hero Cadmus. While she was gathering flowers by the shore, Zeus, enchanted by her beauty, transformed into a snow-white bull and descended to earth. Seeing the magnificent creature, Europa climbed onto its back. At once the bull, Zeus, charged into the sea. Terrified, she clung to his horns as he swam across the ocean until they reached Crete, the island where Zeus himself had once been hidden. There she bore him several children, among them Minos, king of Crete and master of the legendary Minotaur. In Europa's honor, Zeus gave her name to an entire continent and placed the image of the white bull in the sky, creating the constellation Taurus. Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of the gods, was the protector of marriage and women. She was deeply respected in Greek society, but despite this, she remained one of the most vengeful and unforgiving deities of Olympus. Zeus's constant infidelities only fueled her anger. Although Hera was queen of the gods, she bore Zeus only 2 of the 12 Olympians, Ares and Hephaestus. The others were born from his lovers. One of the most insulting affairs was with Princess Io, a devoted priestess of Hera herself. To protect Io from his wife's jealousy, Zeus turned her into a white cow, but Hera was not fooled. She demanded Zeus give her the cow. With no choice, he agreed. Hera imprisoned Io in a cave under the guard of the giant Argus, who had 100 eyes and could sleep with only half of them at a time, always remaining watchful. Fearing his wife, Zeus dared not intervene personally. He sent Hermes to free Io. Hermes, a skilled musician, approached Argus, played his flute, and sang a lullaby. When the last eye finally closed, he killed Argus and freed Io. To remember him, Hera placed Argus's eyes on the tail of the peacock, her favorite bird. Yet she did not stop there. Hera sent a gadfly to torment Io, driving her to wander the world. The sea she crossed was named the Ionian Sea, and the strait she passed became the Bosporus, the passage of the cow. At last Io reached the Nile in Egypt, where Zeus restored her human form. She bore him a son, Epaphus, and became the ancestor of many Greek heroes, including Perseus and Heracles. Leto, another of Zeus's lovers, also suffered Hera's full fury. When Hera learned that Leto was pregnant with twins by Zeus, she sent the serpent Python to chase her, forcing her to flee across Greece in search of refuge. But Hera forbade any city to shelter her. Leto wandered from Athens to Crete, from Lemnos to Samos, and everywhere she was refused, for fear of the queen of the gods. Only the island of Delos agreed to take her in. Yet she still could not give birth. For Hera, plotting still, kept Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, trapped on Olympus, preventing any delivery. After 9 days and nights of painful labor, the other goddesses took pity on Leto, freed Eileithyia, and she finally gave birth. She named one child Apollo and the other Artemis. He became the god of archery. She, the goddess of the hunt. Both later joined the Olympian pantheon. After the twins' birth, cities across the world held celebrations in their honor. But in Thebes, one woman refused to take part. Queen Niobe, whose beauty was matched only by her arrogance. She boasted of having 7 sons and 7 daughters, claiming she was more worthy of worship than Leto with her 2 children. Hearing this insult, Leto grew furious and sent Apollo and Artemis to take revenge. Apollo slew all of Niobe's sons with his arrows. Artemis killed all of her daughters. Overcome with grief, Niobe fled to her native city of Sipylus, weeping without end and begging the gods to end her suffering. Taking pity, Zeus turned her into stone to stop her pain. This rock, known as the Weeping Rock, still stands in Asia Minor, in western Turkey. They say that when it rains, water seeps through the porous stone, like tears from Niobe's eyes. Apollo, the younger of the twins, was the god of archery, light, and music, and the bringer of prophecy. He journeyed to Mount Parnassus, where the great serpent Python had made its lair, the very creature that had hunted his mother across the earth. In vengeance, Apollo struck the monster down with a storm of arrows from his golden bow. On the spot where Python fell, he built a magnificent temple, the place that would become the home of the famed oracle of Delphi. There, the priestess known as the Pythia became one of the most powerful figures in Greece. Kings and commoners alike came to her. She was believed to be the very voice of Apollo. Breathing the vapors rising from the sanctuary, she fell into a frenzied trance and spoke the god's prophecies through strange visions and murmured words. After slaying Python with 1,000 arrows, Apollo's pride swelled. He declared himself the greatest archer alive. Seeing Eros, the boy god of love, with his tiny bow and arrows, Apollo mocked him, saying he was unworthy even to carry such a weapon. Offended, Eros swore revenge and decided to show Apollo the true power of his bow. Soon after, Apollo came to the river Peneus, where he saw Daphne, the beautiful daughter of the river god. Eros shot Apollo with a golden arrow, igniting a fierce desire, and struck Daphne with a lead-tipped shaft that filled her heart with loathing. When Apollo, burning with passion, approached her, she fled. Under the spell of Eros, he gave chase with divine speed. Terrified, Daphne cried out to her father for help. Hearing her plea, Peneus transformed her body into a tree. Her skin became bark, her hair turned to leaves, and the first laurel tree was born. Grief-stricken, Apollo made the laurel his sacred symbol of eternal love. He granted it the power to stay evergreen, and from that day wore a laurel crown so that Daphne would always remain close to his heart. Apollo's most important child was Asclepius, the legendary healer so skilled he could bring the dead back to life. This angered Hades, for such resurrections upset the balance of nature and deprived the underworld of new souls. To restore order, Zeus struck Asclepius down with a thunderbolt, but later, at Apollo's request, brought him back. Thus, Asclepius became the god of healing and medicine. His daughter Hygieia, goddess of cleanliness, gave us the very word hygiene. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was the goddess of the hunt, the moon, and the wild. A master archer, she fiercely guarded the balance of nature and her own chastity. When the hunter Actaeon, grandson of Cadmus, accidentally saw her bathing, she punished him without mercy. She transformed him into a stag and set his own 50 hounds upon him. Actaeon died in agony. Poseidon, brother of Zeus, ruled the seas from his palace beneath the waves. Called the Earth Shaker, he could unleash earthquakes as he rode the oceans in his golden chariot, wielding his trident to command the waters. Once, he punished King Minos of Crete. When Minos refused to sacrifice the finest bull, Poseidon cursed his wife with desire for the beast. From that union, the Minotaur was born, half man, half bull. More than once, Poseidon sought to overthrow Zeus. Together with Hera, Athena, and Apollo, he raised a rebellion, but was defeated. As punishment, Zeus forced Poseidon and Apollo to serve King Laomedon of Troy. For a year, they built its mighty walls, the very walls that later withstood the siege of the Trojan War. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, was famed for her love of heroes and strategists, whom she often aided. She once competed with her uncle Poseidon for the patronage of a great city in eastern Greece. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and brought forth a spring, but the water was salty and undrinkable. Athena touched the earth and caused the first olive tree to grow, giving the people food and oil for nourishment, healing, light, and art. The gods awarded her the victory, and the city took her name, Athens. Athena was also patron of crafts and the arts. She invented the trumpet and the flute, and taught humans the art of weaving. Her skill brought her into conflict with a young woman named Arachne. Arachne, an extraordinarily gifted weaver, dared to claim she surpassed even the goddess. She challenged Athena to a contest. Each would weave a tapestry depicting the gods, and only the greater work would win. They wove for hours until, at last, both tapestries were complete. To Athena's surprise, Arachne's work was the better of the two. In a rage, the goddess struck the girl on the head until she collapsed. Yet, instead of killing her, Athena transformed Arachne into the first spider. From then on, she would weave beautiful webs, and creatures like her became known as arachnids. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, was born from the severed flesh of Uranus, making her the eldest of the Olympians. Restless and playful, she often used her powers for mischief, stirring Zeus to lie with mortal women and drawing Hera's wrath upon him. She ruled over desire in both gods and mortals, always accompanied by Eros, known to the Romans as Cupid, whose arrows could enchant any living being. Together, they sparked love in unsuspecting hearts across the world. One day, Eros struck the heart of a handsome youth named Narcissus. Blessed with great beauty, he was also consumed by arrogance and took cruel pleasure in rejecting every woman who sought him. Among them was the nymph Echo. Cursed by Hera for distracting Zeus, she could no longer speak her own words, only repeat those of others. Echo had long loved Narcissus, but when she finally dared to approach him, she could only echo back what he said. Narcissus, unimpressed, rejected her harshly, breaking her heart. In despair, she faded away until only her voice remained, a voice that still repeats our words today. But Echo was not left without vengeance. Nemesis, goddess of retribution, had been watching. When Narcissus next bent to drink from a pool, he finally saw the one he would love. But it was no woman. It was his own reflection. Spellbound, he gazed into his own eyes, unable to turn away. For weeks, he sat by the water, entranced, until at last he could bear it no more. Realizing he could never possess someone as beautiful as himself, Narcissus drove a dagger into his own heart. Where his blood touched the earth, the first Narcissus flower bloomed. And from this tale comes the word narcissism. Yet while some, like Narcissus, were lost in the depths of love, others never stopped searching for it. One of them was Pygmalion, a master sculptor from the island of Cyprus. After many disappointments, he renounced women entirely, devoting himself to his art and to a life of solitude. Working on a new statue, Pygmalion carved day after day until the image of a woman began to emerge. With more care than ever before, he shaped every feature, the delicate face, each strand of hair, until at last the masterpiece was finished. Stepping back, he was awestruck. No woman of flesh and blood could compare to what stood before him. Hour after hour, he held the statue's cold hands and kissed its lifeless lips, mourning that he would never love any woman more than the one he had carved from stone. Night after night, he prayed to the gods to give him a woman as perfect as his statue. And as he prayed, the stone figure behind him began to change. Her rigid hair turned into flowing locks, and her grey, cracked skin grew soft and warm. Before him stood not a statue, but a living woman, Galatea. Aphrodite had answered his prayer, and Pygmalion's years of loneliness were over. But though Aphrodite loved helping lovers, she was also vain and jealous. Such was the fate of Psyche, a mortal princess, whose beauty was said to surpass even that of the goddess of love herself. Men came from every corner of the world to look upon Psyche, and soon they forgot Aphrodite. Her temples crumbled, her altars grew cold. Enraged, Aphrodite summoned Eros and ordered him to make Psyche fall in love with the most wretched man on earth. But when Eros saw Psyche, he fell in love with her himself and disobeyed the goddess. He became the only one untouched by his own arrows. Left alone, Psyche went to the oracle at Delphi. She was told to go to the palace of her future husband, a husband who would appear only at night, whom she was forbidden to see. At first she was happy, but one day curiosity overcame her. She lit a lamp and discovered that her husband was Eros himself. A drop of hot oil fell on the god's shoulder. He awoke, felt her betrayal, and left Psyche. In despair, she turned to Aphrodite, but the goddess gave her an impossible task: to journey into the underworld and ask Persephone, queen of the dead, for a portion of her beauty. Psyche accomplished the task, but on her way back, she could not resist opening the box. Inside was not beauty, but eternal sleep. She collapsed, unconscious. Then Eros, moved by her devotion, saved her with his arrow. Zeus granted Psyche immortality, and their wedding was celebrated on Olympus. Their daughter Hedone became the goddess of delight, bringing joy to mortals. But not all tales of the gods were filled with love. Hephaestus, god of the forge and son of Zeus and Hera, had a harsh childhood. Born lame, he was cast from Olympus by Hera herself. He survived and grew strong, vowing revenge. Hephaestus crafted a golden throne for Hera, a throne from which no one could rise. Only through Zeus's intervention was she freed. The price was that Hephaestus would take as his wife the most beautiful goddess on Olympus, Aphrodite. Hephaestus became a master inventor. He built countless palaces on Olympus and forged the gods' greatest tools: Athena's aegis, Hermes' winged helmet and sandals, Helios's chariot. All of them came from his legendary forge. Among his most famous works were Eros's bow and arrows and the gleaming armor of Achilles, which helped the heroes of Greek myth. To the Romans, he was Vulcan, the god of fire, laboring in a forge beneath Mount Etna in Sicily. People said the smoke and lava of the volcano rose from his underground workshop. Ares, the god of war, reveled in battle and the destruction of cities. Both mortals and gods hated him because he embodied blind rage, cruelty, and bloodshed. The other gods often mocked him for sport. Ares had a long affair with Aphrodite, the wife of Hephaestus. They met whenever her husband was away. When Hephaestus found out, he forged an invisible net and hung it above his bed. The next time Ares came to Aphrodite, the two lovers were caught, naked and helpless. Hephaestus summoned all the gods of Olympus to witness their shame. Laughter rang across the sky until Poseidon finally took pity on them and set them free. But Aphrodite was not Ares's only lover. He also lay with Eos, the goddess of dawn, who rose into the sky each morning to clear the path for her brother Helios, the sun. Out of jealousy, Aphrodite cursed Eos, dooming her to an uncontrollable desire for young mortals. One morning, at the edge of dawn, Eos looked down and saw Troy. There lived a young Trojan prince named Tithonus, whose beauty haunted her. She descended to earth to meet him, and soon they fell in love. Every morning, after finishing her duties, Eos would return to Troy to see her beloved. But the more she loved him, the more she feared losing him to age, war, hunger, or disease. So she asked Zeus to make Tithonus immortal. Zeus agreed, but Eos made a fatal mistake. She forgot to ask for eternal youth. At first they were happy, but over time his hair turned gray, his body weakened, and his mind dimmed. Centuries passed. He became a prisoner of age, yet death never came. With a heavy heart, Eos placed his frail body in a grand hall, away from the outside world. Years went by until his body dried to nothing but bones. Then Eos transformed him into the first cicada, a creature known for its long life and its song at dawn when Eos rises again into the sky. Hermes, messenger of the gods and patron of thieves, was famous as a trickster. He delighted in teasing and irritating his fellow deities. When he came of age, Hermes became the herald, carrying a golden staff as the symbol of his office. With his winged sandals and helmet, he could fly, delivering messages between Olympus and the underworld. There, he aided Hades, guiding the souls of the dead. Like the other gods, Hermes had many children by many women. But one of his sons was special: Pan, the god of nature and fertility. He was born with the body of a satyr, half man, half goat. His mother, the nymph Dryope, was so terrified by the child's horns, beard, and hooves that she ran away. Hermes brought Pan to Olympus. The gods were charmed by his looks and cheerful spirit and grew to love him. Dionysus, god of wine and revelry, loved him most of all. He gave him the name Pan, meaning all, because all the gods loved him. Yet like his father, Pan was known for chasing nymphs, the spirits of rivers and forests. One of them, named Syrinx, he loved especially. Pursuing her through a marsh, Pan frightened the nymph, and to escape, she transformed into a bundle of reeds. When Pan reached the river, a gust of wind blew through the reeds and created a melody he had never heard before. Inspired, he cut the stalks, bound them with wax, and made a flute. Sitting on the bank, he played a tune in Syrinx's memory. From then on, the instrument was called the Pan flute, and the god carried it everywhere. Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, had an unusual birth. His mother Semele asked Zeus to appear in his true form. The sight of the thunder god killed her with terror. Zeus rescued the unborn child from her womb and sewed it into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born. Becoming one of Greece's most beloved gods, he embodied pleasure. His followers gave themselves to drunkenness, wild dancing, and love. Known as the Liberator, Dionysus created a new drink, wine. It helped his devotees forget their pain and brought joy and euphoria. Though he spent much of his time at feasts, Dionysus was a generous god, willing to grant mortals their deepest wishes. One day, he saved a friend of King Midas. In gratitude, he offered Midas one wish. Blinded by greed, the king asked for the power to turn everything he touched into gold. Dionysus granted the wish. Overjoyed, Midas returned to his palace, touching everything he saw. Floors, walls, even his clothes became gold. He boasted of his wealth to guests from across the realm. But soon, thirst came. When he lifted water to his lips, it too turned to gold. Bread, meat, wine, and fruit all became metal. Midas realized he was doomed to starve and die amid his riches. In despair, he wept, and the sound of his cries brought his daughter running to comfort him. When she touched his hand, she turned into a golden statue. Midas fled back to Dionysus, begging to be freed from the cursed gift. The god took pity and told him to bathe in the river Pactolus. When Midas waded in, the water washed the golden curse away. Once again a mortal man, he remained forever a warning to those who put wealth above all else. Among the 12 Olympians was Demeter, sister of Zeus and goddess of agriculture. She watched over the bounty of the harvest and the fertility of the land. Under her care, the fields never failed, and the earth lived in an endless spring. Yet above all else, she cherished her daughter, Persephone. But Persephone had another admirer, Hades. One day, as she wandered across a meadow, a beautiful narcissus bloomed before her, unlike any flower she had ever seen. When Persephone bent down to pick it, the ground split open beneath her feet. Hades rose up and seized her, dragging her into the underworld where he forced her to become his wife. In despair over her daughter's disappearance, Demeter searched for 9 days and nights until the sun god Helios told her who had taken Persephone. Demeter withdrew for an entire year, refusing to return until her daughter was freed. But without the goddess of agriculture, the world fell into famine. Fields withered. Only when humanity stood on the brink of extinction did Zeus intervene, ordering Hades to release Persephone. Hades agreed, but before she left, he cunningly fed her the food of the dead, a single pomegranate seed, binding her forever to the underworld. To save humankind, Zeus brokered a compromise. For 9 months each year, Persephone would stay with her mother on Olympus, and Demeter, rejoicing, would make nature bloom. But for 3 months, Persephone would return to Hades, and winter would fall upon the earth, the season of Demeter's grief. This is how the cycle of the seasons began. Among all the gods of ancient Greece, few inspired more fear than Hades. Brother of Zeus and Poseidon, he ruled the underworld, a hidden realm where the souls of the dead dwelled. Though he ruled it with Persephone, death itself did not answer to him. That power belonged to Thanatos, who took the souls, while Hermes escorted them to the shores of the underworld. There, on the shore, waited the eternal ferryman Charon, the only one who could carry souls across the deadly river Styx, which separated the living world from the dead. Only those who had coins placed under their tongues at burial could pay Charon. Those who could not pay were condemned to wander the banks of the Styx for 100 years before being allowed to cross. After crossing the Styx, souls passed a white rock and came to the great adamantine gates of the underworld, guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound, ready to devour anyone who tried to break in or escape. Beyond the gates, the souls went to the court of the underworld, where 3 judges decided their fate. They examined every deed done in life. Those who had not offended the gods found peace. The guilty faced eternal torment. After judgment, the souls took one of 3 paths, to the Asphodel Meadows, to Elysium, or to the deepest depths of Hades' realm, Tartarus. The Asphodel Meadows were a quiet place for those who had lived without great virtue or great evil. Most souls came here, and after 1,000 years they drank from the river Lethe, forgetting their past and being reborn to walk the earth again. The second path led to Elysium, a paradise of eternal bliss, where heroes, demigods, and especially virtuous mortals dwelled. Here, they enjoyed all the pleasures of life, feasts, hunts, and celebrations. Each soul could return to earth if it wished, but most stayed to suffer no more. Within Elysium lay a separate island, the Isle of the Blessed, reserved for the greatest heroes, Helen of Troy, Achilles, and Odysseus among them. The third path led to Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld, reserved for the worst criminals and those who had insulted the gods. Here Kronos and the other titans dwelled, forever watching the arrival of new condemned souls. Only in Tartarus did Hades himself intervene, devising punishments for their crimes. The Danaids, 49 sisters who murdered their husbands, were condemned to carry water forever into a leaky jar that never filled. Ixion, the first kinslayer who lusted after Zeus's wife, was bound to a burning wheel. Tantalus, who killed his own son and robbed Zeus, stood in water with fruit hanging above him, but the water and branches always drew back, leaving him in eternal hunger and thirst. The most famous punishment of all was given to Sisyphus, who had deceived the gods and even death itself again and again. Each day, he was forced to roll a massive stone up a hill, only for it to tumble back down just as he neared the summit, condemning him to begin again without end. Although Hades held absolute authority over the underworld, his realm was so vast that he summoned the Erinyes, 3 relentless sisters who pursued and punished criminals, especially those who had shed the blood of their kin. They never knew rest until they had driven their victims to madness. Within the underworld lay also the Fields of Mourning, a place reserved for those who had longed for love all their lives but had remained unfulfilled. Their grief doomed them to wander forever through a dim forest, lamenting the love they could never attain. In the farthest corner of the underworld lay the land of dreams, an island accessible only to the Olympian gods. There ruled Morpheus, god of dreams, who with his brothers shaped the visions of mortals and deities alike, gifting them at night with radiant dreams or terrifying nightmares. His power was so great that many ages later, a potent, sleep-inducing drug would bear his name, morphine. Yet the true seat of power was not on the island of dreams, but in Hades' palace, hidden deep beneath the earth, on an island ringed by fire. Those who tried to reach it without invitation became lost forever in the dark and twisting corridors of the dead. And still, despite the dreadful punishments, Hades and Persephone were not without pity. They often showed compassion to mortals who entered their domain. So, it was with Orpheus, the famed musician and poet. He loved the beautiful Eurydice, but on the day of their wedding, a serpent bit her, and she died. In despair, Orpheus descended into the underworld to bring her back. Reaching the river Styx, he took up his lyre and played such a moving melody that Charon, ferryman of souls, carried him across without payment. On the other shore, Cerberus awaited him, but the music was so tender that the three-headed hound fell into a deep sleep. At last Orpheus stood before the palace of Hades and Persephone and sang of his lost beloved. With tears in his eyes, Hades took pity on him and agreed to release Eurydice's soul. But on one condition: Orpheus must not look back at her until they had both left the underworld. Overjoyed, Orpheus accepted and led his bride through the shadowed halls of the dead. But as they neared the surface and sunlight touched his face, he could not resist the urge to turn and see her. Their journey was not yet complete, and at that instant, Eurydice was pulled back into the realm of the dead, never to return. To the Greeks, this became a lesson in patience and self-restraint. Had Orpheus mastered his impulse, Eurydice, the love of his life, would have remained with him. When the gods had established their dominion over the world and the underworld, the heroic age began. Warriors embarked on great adventures that would later become legends. The first hero of this new era was Cadmus, brother of Europa. Cadmus searched for his sister for a long time, but since she had been taken by Zeus himself, she could not be found. In despair, he turned to the oracle of Delphi. The oracle replied that Europa was lost forever, and mourning her was in vain. Instead, the gods had another destiny for him. He was to follow a sacred cow and found a city where it lay down to rest. Obeying the prophecy, Cadmus followed the cow for several days, until in Boeotia it lay down. On that spot, he founded the city of Thebes, which would grow to be one of the mightiest in Greece, rivaling Athens and Sparta. To consecrate the new city and win the favor of the gods, Cadmus had to offer a sacrifice to Athena. But when he sent his companions to draw water from a spring, they were killed by a dragon guarding it. Hearing their cries, Cadmus seized his spear, attacked the beast, and slew it, not knowing that this dragon was sacred to Ares. For that offense, Cadmus was required to serve Ares for 8 years to atone for his crime. Meanwhile, on Olympus, another drama unfolded. Hephaestus, god of the forge, was married to Aphrodite, but she loved Ares in secret. From this union was born a daughter, Harmonia. When Cadmus had completed his years of service, Ares, moved by his loyalty, gave him Harmonia as his wife. Their wedding was celebrated in Thebes, and all the gods of Olympus attended. But Hephaestus, enraged by his wife's betrayal, gave Harmonia a cursed necklace that brought misfortune to all who possessed it. Unaware of the curse, Cadmus and Harmonia ruled Thebes for many years and had 5 children. But in time, the curse began to work. Semele, the youngest daughter, perished when she saw Zeus in his true form. Ino lost her mind after her husband murdered their children. Agave, in a frenzy, tore apart her own son Pentheus for dishonoring Dionysus. Autonoe lost her son Actaeon, whom Artemis transformed into a stag. Harmonia's necklace passed from generation to generation, bringing new disasters. But it struck Oedipus, the seventh king of Thebes, most cruelly of all. His father Laius had received a dreadful prophecy from the oracle. His son would kill him and marry his own mother. To avoid this fate, he ordered the infant left to die. But a shepherd saved the child and gave him to the king of Corinth. The boy was named Oedipus, the one with swollen feet. When grown, Oedipus heard the prophecy and fled from his foster parents to protect them. On the road to Thebes, he killed a man at a crossroads, not knowing it was his real father, Laius. Arriving in the city, Oedipus solved the riddle of the Sphinx, who was terrorizing the people, freeing Thebes. He was crowned king and given the widow of Laius, his own mother Jocasta, as his wife. Thus the prophecy was fulfilled. In time, the truth came to light, and a plague fell upon Thebes. Jocasta took her own life, and Oedipus, blinded by grief, left the city. Only his daughter Antigone stayed by his side, accompanying her father in his wanderings. Oedipus died an old man, finally understanding that no mortal can ever escape fate. His story left a deep imprint on culture, inspiring Sigmund Freud to develop the concept of the Oedipus complex, the theory that every young man subconsciously longs for his mother while feeling hostility toward his father, just as in Oedipus's own life. Although the line of Cadmus was the first great heroic dynasty, soon a new generation of heroes would rise. Between mighty Athens and Sparta lay another kingdom, Argos, ruled by King Acrisius. But Acrisius received a terrifying prophecy from the oracle of Delphi. His future grandson was destined to kill him. Not long after, Zeus, captivated by the beauty of the king's daughter Danae, entered her chamber in the form of a shower of gold. From that union, she conceived and bore a son named Perseus. Frightened by the prophecy drawing near, King Acrisius could not bring himself to kill either his daughter or his grandson. Instead, he locked Danae and her infant in a wooden chest and cast it into the sea. After many days and nights adrift, they came to the shores of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found them. He raised the boy as his own son, and Perseus soon reached manhood on the island. But not all was well. The fisherman's brother, King Polydectes, also noticed Danae's beauty and wished to take her as his wife. She was always protected by her son Perseus, who never left her side. Wanting Danae only for himself, Polydectes began looking for a way to rid himself of Perseus. At last, an opportunity arose. Holding a great feast, Polydectes invited guests from across the island, and every man was to bring a horse as a gift. Perseus, who had no money but great speed and strength, boasted that he could give the king an even greater gift, the head of Medusa. This was exactly the chance Polydectes had been waiting for. He commanded Perseus to bring back the head. Never thinking the king would take his words seriously, Perseus set out in despair, knowing only the terrible stories about the creature that awaited him. Yet Medusa had not always been a fearsome monster. The daughter of the sea gods, Phorcys and Ceto, she was one of 3 sisters renowned for their incomparable beauty. The only mortal among them, Medusa was the most beautiful of all, and every man who saw her fell in love. Despite this, Medusa dedicated her life to Athena, goddess of war and wisdom, taking a vow of chastity to serve her as a priestess. But one day, walking by the sea, she caught the eye of Poseidon. Enchanted by her beauty, he followed her into Athena's temple, and there forced himself upon her. enraged that such an act had taken place in her sacred temple, yet unable to direct her anger at mighty Poseidon, Athena instead blamed Medusa for allowing herself to be defiled and for breaking her vow. With divine power, she cursed Medusa, twisting her former beauty into a monstrous face. Her long, lustrous hair became writhing serpents, and her eyes, once so alluring, now turned to stone any who met their gaze. Medusa's sisters, who had defended her, also did not escape Athena's wrath. All three were transformed into dreadful beings and became known as the Gorgons. Banished from their homeland, they settled in North Africa, but their suffering continued as warriors from every land came to hunt them for sport. Years passed. Their loneliness deepened, and hatred of the outside world took root in Medusa and her sisters. They killed any who approached. When Perseus set out to slay Medusa, Athena and Hermes appeared to aid him. Hermes gave him an unbreakable sword, and Athena a gleaming shield polished so bright it reflected like a mirror. Knowing he still needed more to overcome Medusa, Perseus sought out the nymphs, woodland spirits who tended the garden of the Hesperides. Finding them, he asked for their help, and they gave him winged sandals, the helm of invisibility of Hades, and a magic pouch in which Medusa's head could be safely carried. Following the nymphs' directions, he flew to North Africa, to the cave where Medusa dwelled. Slipping inside, Perseus saw her sleeping among the stone bodies of her victims. Using the reflection in the shield, he was careful not to look at her directly, for her gaze would turn him to stone. Seeing only her mirrored image, he drew the sword and swiftly cut off her head without once meeting her eyes, then placed it in the magic pouch. But to Perseus's astonishment, from Medusa's body sprang Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse, son of Poseidon, who had been growing within her all that time. Mounting Pegasus, Perseus soared from the cave and began his journey home to Greece. As he flew over the ocean, Perseus looked down at the waves and was shocked to see a woman chained to a rock. It was the beautiful Andromeda, princess of the kingdom of Ethiopia. She had been offered as a sacrifice to the gods, in the hope that her death would save the realm from a terrifying sea monster that ravaged the coast and killed all who crossed its path. Struck by Andromeda's beauty, Perseus approached her parents, the king and queen of Ethiopia, with an offer. He would slay the beast in exchange for Andromeda's hand in marriage. Relieved, they agreed. And Perseus, soaring above the monster on his winged sandals, struck it with his sword and killed it. Bringing Andromeda back to shore, the queen kept her promise and blessed their union. Soon Perseus and Andromeda were married. Together, they flew on Pegasus back to the island of Seriphos, where Perseus's mother awaited him. But nothing was as it had been. His mother Danae still refused to obey the king, yet without Perseus to protect her, she had been forced into hiding. When Perseus learned that King Polydectes had used violence to try to force her into marriage, he stormed into the palace in fury. The guards drew their swords. Perseus pulled Medusa's head from his bag and held it up. Instantly, the soldiers turned to stone. In panic, the king grabbed a spear, but it was too late. Perseus raised the head again, and the terror on the king's face was fixed forever in stone. At last, reunited, Danae embraced her son, grateful she would no longer live in fear. Leaving the island, Perseus, Andromeda, and Danae decided to return to Argos, Perseus's birthplace, where his grandfather, King Acrisius, still ruled. But before departing, Perseus returned the divine gifts. Athena took Medusa's head and set it upon her shield, the final punishment for the former priestess, now a lasting emblem of Athena's power and supremacy. Back in Argos, Perseus was welcomed as a hero for slaying Medusa. The townspeople urged him to compete in local games, to prove himself against the strongest men in Greece. During the tournament, after dominating his opponents, it came time for him to throw the discus. Spinning with all his might, Perseus misjudged his strength. The discus flew into the crowd and struck a spectator. Rushing over, Perseus discovered it was his own grandfather, King Acrisius, killed instantly by the blow. And so, as the ancient prophecy had foretold, King Acrisius died at the hands of his grandson, a lesson that no mortal can escape destiny. But having shed kindred blood, one of the gravest crimes in ancient Greek culture, Perseus could no longer remain in Argos. Instead, he founded his own kingdom, Mycenae, north of Argos and west of Athens, which soon became the most powerful city in Greece. Its great walls were built of colossal stones, far too heavy for ordinary men to lift. Perseus enlisted mighty Cyclops, whose craftsmanship was unmatched. Ruling the city, Perseus and Andromeda had many children, and their dynasty lasted for generations. But they did not know that one of their descendants would become the most famous hero of all, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, who would be known as Heracles, and whose 12 labors would enter the history of the entire world. Yet despite his future glory, Heracles' early life was one of the most tragic stories in Greek mythology. Zeus, seated on his throne atop Olympus, looked down upon the world and fixed his gaze on the beautiful Alcmene, Perseus' granddaughter. Descending to earth, Zeus lay with her, and soon she was pregnant with a son named Heracles. Later, the Romans would call him Hercules. Zeus planned to make him the next great king of Greece. But he did not know that his wife Hera, queen of the gods, was watching. In the past, she had endured Zeus's betrayals and his many illegitimate children. But this time, her patience was at an end. As Heracles was about to be born, she used magic to delay Alcmene's labor, while hastening the birth of another descendant of Perseus, a child named Eurystheus. Because Eurystheus was born just moments before Heracles, he became heir to the kingdom, and Zeus was bound to keep his promise. Although Zeus could do nothing about the loss of the throne, he decided to take his own revenge on Hera. When Heracles was born, Zeus carried him to Olympus, into Hera's chambers, and while she slept, placed the infant at her breast. Heracles drank the goddess's milk, gaining a measure of her divine strength. Awakening, Hera angrily pushed the child away, and her milk spilled across the sky, forming the Milky Way. Zeus laughed and returned Heracles to earth, laying him in the cradle beside his mother. But on Olympus, Hera seethed. This insult she could not forgive. In an attempt to kill Heracles, she sent 2 snakes into his cradle. To her astonishment, the infant only laughed, seizing one serpent in each tiny hand and strangling them with the power he had just gained from the goddess herself. Hera looked down in fury and vowed to make Heracles' life unbearable. As he grew, he received the finest education in Greece, from archery to music. Yet one thing became clear: he had a fiery temper. The combination of anger and superhuman strength made him dangerous both to enemies and to friends. His music teacher Lynn discovered this too late. While teaching Heracles to play the lyre, he corrected the youth once too often, and Heracles struck him on the head, killing him instantly. Even so, the punishment was light, but his rage would bring him sorrow again and again. As an adult, Heracles married the Theban princess Megara, and together they had 3 children. But this happiness displeased Hera, who still harbored her grudge against her husband's son. Now Heracles was not only married, but stood in line to become the next king of Thebes. Hera prepared to fulfill the vow she had made so many years before. Heracles' joy would not last forever. Completely unaware of Hera's schemes, Heracles returned home one day to find the door smashed open. Rushing inside, he could not find his family. When he called out, several monstrous creatures emerged from the depths of the house, crawling toward him. Seized by an unnatural fury, Heracles leapt at the creatures, killing one with a single mighty blow to the head. The others fled in terror, but Heracles, blinded by rage, allowed none to escape. He pursued them and killed them all with his bare hands, one after another. Only then did Hera lift the spell, dispelling the illusion before Heracles' eyes. The hero stared in horror as the monsters changed back into their true forms. His own family now lay dead at his feet. Desperately, he shook their bodies, trying to wake them. Tears streamed from his eyes, but it was already too late. Hera's magic had done its work, and now he would live forever with the guilt of having slain his own wife and children. Looking down at his blood-stained hands, Heracles realized he had to atone for his crime. Killing a member of one's own family was considered one of the gravest offenses in ancient Greece. If he failed to make amends, the Erinyes would hunt and torment him forever. The only one who could give him guidance was the famous oracle of Delphi. So he exiled himself from Thebes and set out on a journey to seek forgiveness. The Delphic oracle was the voice of Apollo, able to speak prophecies and counsel from the god. But this time, Hera used her magic to sway its words. When Heracles asked what he must do to atone, the oracle told him he must serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae for 10 years. Eurystheus was a descendant of Perseus, born only a few seconds before Heracles himself. Understanding his task, Heracles bowed to the oracle, rose, and began the long journey to Mycenae. King Eurystheus had known of Heracles for a long time and envied him deeply. They were cousins, both descendants of Perseus, but they were nothing alike. Heracles was strong and heroic, while Eurystheus was cowardly and weak, often sending others to fight his battles. Arriving to place himself under his cousin's command, Heracles bowed before Eurystheus, who could barely conceal his delight. Accepting Heracles' service at once, the king ordered him to perform 10 labors in 10 years. Only then would his guilt be forgiven. There was one condition. The labors had to be accomplished without any help and without any reward. Heracles hung his head in shame and asked what his first labor would be. Eurystheus told him of the Nemean lion, which was terrorizing a village in the northeast of his kingdom. The lion was invincible. Its golden hide could not be pierced by weapons, and its claws were sharper than any sword. It had killed every man sent against it. Now Heracles had to destroy the beast. Knowing neither sword nor spear could pierce the lion's hide, Heracles spent months training, uprooting trees and lifting boulders to increase his strength. Stronger than ever, he went out to face the beast with his bare hands. Coming to the lion's lair, Heracles passed the bodies of warriors whose swords and axes lay shattered. The lion sprang out and leapt at him, but Heracles swerved aside and caught its neck in his arms. They struggled for hours, but when Heracles locked his grip tighter around the creature's throat, he crushed it until it snapped. The dead lion fell to the ground. The first labor was complete. Realizing the lion's hide might serve him, he drew one of its claws and used it to flay the skin. He then draped the pelt over his shoulders as a cloak and placed the head upon his own as a helmet. Leaving the lair, Heracles found a great tree, tore it from the earth, trimmed off its branches, and shaped it into a club. From then on, the hide was his armor and the club his weapon, symbols of his path to redemption. Returning to Mycenae wrapped in the lion's skin, he stunned Eurystheus, who had never expected his cousin to return alive. For the second labor, Heracles was sent to kill the Lenaean Hydra. He journeyed to Lake Lerna near the city of Argos, where the monstrous water serpent dwelled. Known as the Hydra, the creature had 9 heads, one of them immortal, and its blood was the most poisonous substance known to man. But Hera wished to make the task even harder and hid a gigantic crab in the depths of the lake. When he arrived, Heracles struck at the Hydra with his club, cutting off one of its heads with a mighty blow. But 2 new heads grew in its place. Astonished, Heracles began chopping off more heads, but with each stroke, new ones sprouted. As he fought the monster, the giant crab leapt from the water and pinned him to the ground. When death seemed certain, an arrow flew from the bushes and struck the Hydra in the side. Heracles turned and saw his nephew Iolaus aiming another arrow. The boy had secretly followed his uncle, hoping to help. While the creatures were distracted, Heracles seized his club and crushed the crab with a single blow. Then Iolaus began searing the Hydra's necks with burning pitch after each head was cut, to keep new ones from growing. Together, they fought for hours, until not a single head remained. Heracles then dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood. Even the smallest scratch from those arrows would be deadly, a weapon that would serve him well in the labors to come. Despite his victory, Eurystheus refused to count the labor because Heracles had accepted Iolaus's help. He would have to complete another to make up for it. Grateful to the crab, Hera placed its image in the sky as the constellation Cancer. For the third labor, Heracles was commanded to capture the Ceryneian hind and bring it back alive. This was an extraordinarily beautiful creature, like a deer with bronze hooves and golden antlers. Heracles pursued it for a full year before finally capturing it. Angry that the task had been completed so easily, Eurystheus immediately gave him another to capture the Erymanthian boar. This time, Heracles journeyed to Mount Erymanthus to take the giant boar alive. He decided to visit his friend, Pholus the centaur. Centaurs, half man, half horse, were usually wild, but Pholus was an exception, wise and kindly, a friend of Heracles since youth. Arriving there, Heracles became a guest at a feast Pholus held, with several other centaurs present, including Chiron, the immortal archer who had once taught Heracles himself. The feast went well, until Heracles stepped outside and opened a jar of wine, not knowing it belonged to all the centaurs and had been a gift from Dionysus. The wine's scent was so strong that centaurs smelled it from miles away. Gathering in outrage, they demanded an explanation. Pholus and Chiron tried to calm the crowd, but the situation spiraled out of control. A fight broke out, and Heracles was forced to fire his poisoned arrows. Many centaurs were slain. Then tragedy struck by accident. One arrow struck Chiron. He could not die being immortal, but the Hydra's poison condemned him to eternal pain. Zeus, seeing this, took pity on the old centaur and placed him in the sky as the constellation Sagittarius. Meanwhile, Pholus picked up one of the arrows to examine it and dropped it on his own foot. The poison killed him instantly. Grieved, Heracles still finished his task. He drove the boar into deep snow and bound it in chains. Seeing the beast, Eurystheus leapt into a storage jar in terror and would not climb out until Heracles removed it from the palace. Heracles could barely suppress a laugh, but he did as ordered. The king then hastily assigned him the fifth labor. This time, Heracles was to clean the stables of King Augeas in a single day, barehanded and without help. Eurystheus was sure it was impossible. Argaeus' stables held 3,000 immortal cattle and had not been cleaned for 30 years. The filth rose several feet high, and the stench was unbearable. Arriving there, Heracles struck a bargain with the king. He would receive a tenth of the herd if he finished before sunset. Realizing he could not do it alone, Heracles dug a channel from the rivers Alpheus and Peneus, diverting the water into the stables. The torrent washed away decades of filth and fertilized the surrounding fields. The people of Elis celebrated, and in their honor, Heracles founded the Olympic Games, to be held every 4 years. Yet Eurystheus refused to count this labor too, because Heracles had accepted a promised reward. Thus, the original 10 labors became 12. The 6th labor was to drive out the man-eating birds from Lake Stymphalus. These were the sacred birds of Ares, with iron beaks that could pierce any armor and droppings that were deadly poison. When Heracles arrived, he found a pair of bronze clappers hanging from the trunk of a willow tree, a gift left for him by Athena. Thanking the goddess for her help, he began to shake the clappers. Their harsh ringing inflicted unbearable pain on the birds. Hundreds of them rose from the lake, forming a vast flock in the sky. Then Heracles took aim and shot down as many as he could until the survivors finally fled. His 6th labor was complete. When King Eurystheus once again saw his cousin returning in triumph, he realized he had exhausted all the difficult tasks within his own realm. Needing time to invent a new challenge, he sent Heracles to Crete, the island off the mainland of Greece, where King Minos would give him his next assignment. Minos had received from the sea god Poseidon a magnificent white bull, on the condition that it be sacrificed in the god's honor. But the king decided to keep the animal for himself, believing it too beautiful to kill. In punishment, Poseidon caused the queen to fall in love with the bull. From their union was born a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, the Minotaur. This creature forced King Minos to confine it within a labyrinth beneath his palace. And after the bull had impregnated the queen, Poseidon drove the animal mad so that it rampaged across Crete, destroying everything in its path. Heracles was not meant to slay the Minotaur. That fate belonged to another hero, Theseus, but King Minos truly wanted Heracles to capture the maddened bull that was wreaking havoc in his kingdom. Accepting the challenge, Heracles went out to meet the bull. When the beast charged at him, he seized its horns and forced its head down to the earth. After many hours of struggle, the bull at last gave in, and Heracles leapt onto its back. Because the bull was a son of Poseidon, it could walk upon the sea. So Heracles rode it across the water to show Eurystheus proof of his completed task. Having fulfilled the labor and unwilling to kill an animal sacred to Poseidon, Heracles released the bull from the palace. It ran wild through mainland Greece until years later it was captured and slain by the hero Theseus. For his 8th labor, Heracles had to bring back the mares of Diomedes, the Thracian king. These were terrifying creatures, known for breathing fire, made even more ferocious because Diomedes fed them the flesh of unsuspecting guests and strangers in his realm. As Heracles set out for Thrace, he was accompanied by his friend and lover Abderus, son of Hermes. Upon arrival, they reached the palace of Diomedes and saw the fire-breathing mares Heracles was meant to take. The horses were chained to the palace wall with iron links on public display, tossing their heads and foaming at the mouth. But when Heracles went inside to meet King Diomedes, a foul man with an unbearable stench, a terrible scream, rose up behind him. Rushing out to see what had happened, Heracles was horrified to witness the mares tearing apart the body of his young lover Abderus, who had wandered too close out of curiosity. Overcome with rage, Heracles stormed back into the palace, killed the guards, and dragged Diomedes outside by the hair. Giving the king a taste of his own medicine, Heracles hurled him to the very beasts that had devoured Abderus. Yet the flesh of Diomedes was so vile that the horses stopped eating halfway through, forever losing their taste for human flesh. Now that the mares were docile, Heracles seized their chains and led them back to Eurystheus, completing the labor. For the 9th task, Heracles was to obtain the belt of Hippolyta, a golden and leather girdle that conferred victory in battle. It belonged to Hippolyta, daughter of Ares and queen of the Amazons, a race of warrior women who fought better than most men and regularly raided neighboring tribes to assert their power. Heracles traveled east, taking with him a small band of soldiers in case he had to fight the Amazons. Yet on arrival, he was surprised by their hospitality, and Hippolyta herself showed him great interest. Hearing of his famous deeds and moved by desire, she offered him her belt as a token of favor. But Hera, watching from Olympus, could hardly believe her eyes. The task was going far too smoothly, so she chose to interfere. Disguising herself as an Amazon, she slipped into the camp and began sowing mistrust among the women. Little by little, she convinced the entire tribe that Heracles had come to enslave them. The Amazons grew furious, mounted their horses, and charged the men they had earlier welcomed into the camp. Hearing the commotion, Heracles ran outside to see the Amazons slaughtering his comrades. In anger, he thought Hippolyta had betrayed him, luring him away so his men could be killed. Before the queen could explain, Heracles swung his club and struck her down. The belt she had already given him could not save her. He then hurled himself into the fight, cutting down every Amazon who dared oppose him. Only a small part of his force survived, and together they fled the camp and made their way back to Mycenae. By now, Eurystheus was weary of Heracles succeeding at every challenge, so he decided to send him as far away as possible, to the island of Erythea. For his 10th labor, Heracles was to travel there and steal the herd of cattle belonging to Geryon, a 3-bodied giant. Heading southwest, he journeyed along the African coast. But soon, the fierce heat began to infuriate him, even toward the sun itself. Crossing the Libyan desert, Heracles drew his bow and threatened to shoot the sun with a poisoned arrow unless it ceased tormenting him. The sun, frightened by the threat, descended to earth in human form as the god Helios and begged Heracles not to shoot. He promised to shine less fiercely during the hero's journey and gave him his great golden cup, a vessel shaped like a water lily in which Helios sailed across the ocean at night. At last, reaching the island of Erythea, Heracles quickly found the herd of cattle and their 3-bodied master, Geryon. Wishing to finish the task swiftly, Heracles did not even bother with a fight. He loosed a poisoned arrow and killed the giant at once. Then he drove the cattle into the cup of Helios and sailed back home to Mycenae, where he delivered them to Eurystheus. For his 11th labor, Heracles was sent to the garden of the Hesperides, daughters of the night, to obtain the golden apples that grew on a tree which granted immortality to anyone who tasted its fruit. But no mortal knew where the garden lay. Athena had also set a 100-headed dragon named Ladon to watch over the tree. Setting out to find the mythical garden, Heracles first visited the Titan Prometheus, whom he believed might know its location. Prometheus, creator of humankind, was chained to a rock for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mortals. By the time Heracles reached him, his torment had lasted for centuries. Moved by pity, Heracles broke the Titan's chains and freed him, at last ending his suffering. Grateful, Prometheus gladly revealed the garden's location, but warned that no mortal being could pluck the golden apples from the tree. Instead, he advised Heracles to seek help from the Titan Atlas, who lived nearby. Taking Prometheus's counsel, Heracles went to find Atlas, easy enough to locate because of his immense size. Atlas had fought against the Olympians in the war of gods and titans, and after their defeat, Zeus had condemned him to hold up the vault of heaven for all eternity. Approaching the Titan, Heracles explained his quest and offered a bargain. He would bear the heavens for a while and give Atlas a brief respite if Atlas would fetch the golden apples for him. Grateful for even a moment's relief from his burden, Atlas agreed and set out, transferring the weight of the sky to Heracles' shoulders. Though he had overcome the impossible many times before, even Heracles found it almost unbearable to endure the crushing weight he now held. After a time, his muscles cramped, his body trembled, and he wondered if this might be the task that would finally break him. As the sun began to set, Atlas returned, carrying a basket filled with the golden apples. Breathing a sigh of relief, Heracles thanked the Titan and prepared to hand the sky back to him. But Atlas, unwilling to resume his burden, offered instead to deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself, promising to return and take the heavens back later. Heracles was not so easily deceived. Thanking Atlas for his generous offer, he agreed to hold the sky a little longer, but asked the Titan to take it back for just a moment so he could slip his lion's skin beneath his head and shoulders. Suspecting nothing, Atlas set the apples on the ground and lifted the vault of heaven once more. The instant Heracles was free, he seized the apples, bade Atlas farewell, and swiftly departed for Eurystheus to complete his task. Atlas roared in fury, his voice shaking the earth for miles. Decades and then centuries passed, and at last Atlas became one with the world itself, turning to stone. His colossal remains became known as the Atlas Mountains of North Africa. For his 12th and final labor, Heracles was ordered to capture Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the gates of the underworld. Descending into the realm of the dead and approaching Hades and Persephone, Heracles explained that he had been sent to take Cerberus as his last trial. Knowing that aiding Heracles would anger Hera, who had always despised him, Hades nevertheless agreed, but set two conditions. First, Heracles must use no weapon. Second, after completing his task, he must return Cerberus unharmed. Heracles accepted and went to face the monster. As with the Nemean lion and the Cretan bull before, he grappled with the hound in a contest of strength that lasted for hours until at last the beast was subdued. Grasping his club in one hand and Cerberus's chain in the other, he dragged the dog back to the world of the living. Heracles led Cerberus before King Eurystheus, who once again hid inside his great jar, now a permanent fixture beside his throne. Peering out, trembling with fear, the king agreed to release Heracles from his service and grant him forgiveness for his past crimes. Heracles was overjoyed. At last he had atoned for his sins and was a free man. But before setting out on new journeys, he kept his promise and returned Cerberus to the underworld. Back among the living, he celebrated for a time, enjoying all the pleasures of freedom. Everywhere he went, he was hailed as a hero and followed by admirers.